That is my favorite topic in psychology to talk about. I'm an organizational psychologist, so getting a PhD in very positive organizational psychology. When we think about what's working well, what makes for a happy life, what makes for optimum experience at work. And before that, I was an athlete. I was an inline speed skater. I got to compete on a professional level. And my specialty was long distance. And so inline speed skating, that's a fancy word for racing on rollerblades, right? So how long do you think is a long distance rollerblading race?
40 miles.
40 miles. Other thoughts? More than 40 or less than 40?
25 miles.
25 miles, okay. You can maybe more somehow, or 30. You guys are pretty close. Usually people don't guess that high, okay? Because that's kind of considered a medium distance race. The longest race in the world is 87 miles, and I won it 3 times. And but after my sports career was over, a lot of times people go into personal training or something physical, and I wasn't really that interested in it because to me, the interesting part of racing is the mental part. You know, for a long distance race, you're thinking about, there's a lot of pain involved, like there is for a lot of sports, you know, and so you're thinking about why are you doing this, and more importantly, why are they, the person I'm competing with, doing this, and how can I use this to my advantage? And that brought me to thinking about motivation, which is what I'm here to talk with you today. So let me ask you guys, okay, first of all, I always do this, okay, so raise your hand if you read the chapter. Awesome, good smattering. I'll take it. So, what's motivation? Or rather, how can you tell, what does it mean to be motivated? It could be from the chapter, it could be from your own experience.
Will to do something.
The will to do something. That's a good one. Other ideas?
Never give up.
Never give up. Okay, drive. Yeah. Okay.
That force to accomplish a goal.
Force to accomplish a goal. Okay. So I'm hearing it's a lot about the will to accomplish a goal, wanting to get to somewhere else is about motivation, right?
Persistence.
Yeah. Persistence. That's one of our words today. Okay. So motivation is really about 3 things. The first one is attention, what you intend to put your focus on. So in some cases this might be a goal, otherwise it might be just how you're filtering things coming in, what you decide to do. I don't know what that means. Okay, so attention. The second one is effort. So how much effort or energy are you going to put into doing whatever you're going to do? And then the third thing is persistence, as you were saying. So attention, what are you going to do? Effort, how much energy are you going to bring to it? And persistence, how long are you going to keep that effort up? And those are the 3 components of motivation. But really all the motivation is consciously deciding to do a thing. That you're going to, deciding to play. You're going to engage in it. You're going to participate. So sometimes it'll have a goal, sometimes it won't. But the idea is it's the conscious stuff we do. So where does this become? Why are we even talking about that in this class? What are some ways that you use motivation in a work setting or a business setting? What does it do for you? Or what does knowing about it do for you?
Part of the function of management, you have to be able to motivate and lead and inspire.
Okay, so motivating other people. Okay. And also motivating yourself, right? I mean, just as a student, you have to kind of figure out a lot of your own motivation to stay focused and achieve results. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that today, motivating other people and motivating yourself. So what does it mean to motivate somebody else? What does that mean?
Push them to do better.
Push them to do better.
Encourage.
Encourage them. Other thoughts?
Give them a reason to accomplish the goal.
Oh yeah, so you're kind of making some meaning for them, or giving them an incentive. Yeah, so that's true. So when we're motivating other people, a lot of the time we think of it as something we're doing, like extra. We think of it like a coach there going, go, go. or like the other, or the coach in the other sense of saying, here's what your goal is. But a lot of the time, what we often mean at work is just to avoid demotivating people, right? Because there's a lot of different ways to be demotivated at work. And so so knowing about motivation isn't just about pushing people toward a result, it can also be about getting out of their way, right? So I have a hypothetical example that it's not really hypothetical, because it's something that is happening in my own life, and I'd like to get your guys' advice about it. So my husband and I rent out rooms in our house. This is a great deal for us, because that way we have many interesting people around us, and also it helps with mortgage. And this all goes fine except for one thing. We have a dishwasher, but when people bring the dishes back to the kitchen, they just put them right in the sink that is next to the dishwasher. For some reason, they do not open the dishwasher, put the dish in the dishwasher, right? They just plop them in the sink. So I wanted to put them straight in the dishwasher and not leave them in the sink. So I need to motivate them, right? So how can we get them? How can I get them to put the dishes in the dishwasher, not in the sink?
Encourage them to.
I'm sorry?
Encourage them to.
Encourage, okay. What would that look like? How would you do that?
Could you please put the dishes in the dishwasher?
Okay, great one. All right. Other ways?
Remind them the dishwasher's there, I guess.
Okay. So, dishwasher.
Like
And they
kind
do
of,
it?
just kind of be like, you know, the great thing about dishwashers is it does all the work for you. So I just kind of remind them that the dishwasher is the easiest part of washing dishes.
Okay, so like over breakfast or something. Oh, by the way?
Yeah.
So reminder. Okay. Other ways?
Mine's a little mean, and I do this. I charge a cleaning fee if I have to be the maid.
Ooh, yeah, charge cleaning fee. That's good. So if you have to clean up with your memo, what does it take to incur your cleaning fee? How bad does it have to be?
It is then $25 a week if I'm going to do my roommate's dishes.
Wow, and so that means if I'm a roommate, I can say, you know what, that's great, I'll pay it, just do my dishes. And you'd be okay with that? Okay, all right. Do people do that?
Yeah,
They do?
it is, my roommate is awful at doing his dishes. It came down to it. He wanted me to create a cleaning chart for him, and I said, no, we're not in kindergarten, so.
So cleaning chart, what's that?
I'm a cleaning wheel where it says this person is in charge of doing this today, and the next person is in charge of doing this tomorrow.
Okay, so that could theoretically work for people, not this person, but other people, right? Definitely someone put that down somewhere, right, because it came up with it. So this time, so basically we all trade off, right? So this week it's your week to do the dishes, next week it's his week to do the dishes. Okay, what are some other ways we can get those dishes into the sink, into the dishwasher, not in the sink?
You might start first, and then they see you.
Okay, so I can model that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Other ways? So we've only touched on a few, there are many, many ways.
Incentive.
Incentive, like what?
Put your dish in the dishwasher, or and then you get a star on. Kids love that.
Yeah, that's right. People do things for, or a sticker of any kind. Okay, what else?
You can just remove all the dishes.
Remove all the dishes. So then we just don't eat at home, basically, or we have to get it out of the pan.
Paper plates.
It wouldn't have
It's not my, whatever you want to do, but it's not my problem.
Right.
Okay, so, remove dishes. Okay. What else? Come on, let me get three more things that we could do.
Replace the product. So replace the dishes with paper
Okay,
plates or something.
use paper plates. Okay. Two more things. Yes.
If they don't put them in the dishwashing, they have to wash them, like themselves, whoever put them on the sink.
Okay, okay, so, where do we put that? That's kind of like a penalty of sorts, right? Penalty, wash by hand, oh my God, the horror. Okay, Other things, one more thing. And there's one more thing out there. Yes.
Well, you could just straight up take away the sink.
Take away the sink, board up that sink, right? There's no more of this washing business. Okay. Okay, so those are some good ideas. Those are some good ideas for getting this thing handled. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about these in the context of the different theories that you have in your book. And I'm gonna throw a few more theories on there for other situations that you might not have done this yet. So, you guys have a list of theories that we talked about before. So I'd like you to yell out some of the theories that are on that list. Right? That's someone that I just saw on your phone. Did you get this? Yeah.
Oh, the equity?
Equity theory, yes. What are some more?
Expectancy.
Expectancy. Reinforcement. Reinforcement.
Goal setting.
What is it?
Goal setting.
Goal setting? More? What is it? Neat? Needs, of course. These theories. Okay. There's a couple of those. There's Maslow. These are the ones in the book. Algebra. You guys talk about Hertzberg, right? That's kind of Lee's theory. Okay. Any more? We get everything? I think we got everything. Okay. So these are basically the theories in your book. So motivation falls into two main categories, and then there's this new emerging part that I also want to make sure I talk about today, because kind of, as psychology has been getting developed, it's a fairly new science, right? It's only been something that people have been studying like maybe about 100 years. So in the beginning, people were learning about this pretty much by studying animals. So a lot of these early motivation theories come from studying animals. And so the theory for all the things that are the extrinsic theories is the idea that you're choosing to do what you do because you want a reward that'll come later as a result of things. That's kind of the definition of extrinsic. You're doing something to get a reward. So that's what all of these theories here in blue have in common. So let's talk first about equity theory. So now, again, you're doing it to get a reward, but you can also think about it in terms of demotivating. Right? So equity theory, does anybody remember from reading the book what equity theory talks about? What it deals with?
Being treated fairly.
Being treated fairly, yeah. Yeah, so equity is about fairness. So with all these theories, it's kind of like they're taking a different piece of the puzzle for motivation. It's not like equity theory is right and expectancy is wrong. It's more like that they cover different aspects of what's going on in this fairly complex human being. So when we're thinking about equity, we're thinking about fairness. And so the idea there is that inputs equal outputs. So inputs are what you are bringing to it, and you want to see that those are equaling the same. It's basically, if whatever you put in, that you get out in a fair way, meaning that if I put in 3 things, that could be the amount of time I have, the amount of experience I have, the amount of effort I put in, then I'll get outputs that are exactly the same as what you would get if you put those same 3 things in there. So on the other hand, if you and, what's your name? Anna. If Anna and I have exactly the same amount of experience and we're both working 40 hours a week and we're both doing it at the same level of proficiency, then we should get paid the same, right? So if Anna's getting paid more than me, what's that do to my motivation? Exactly. So what this describes is that then we come up with reasons why that might be so, or we leave. So if you're getting paid more than I am, I'm gonna say, well, either this is a really unfair situation and I'm out of here, or I say, well, maybe it's because, and I start coming up with reasons why it should be that way, which could then be either motivating or demotivating, depending on what I come up with, right? And the same thing if I end up getting paid more than I would come up with reasons why my work is better. Or I would put more effort in so that I would know that I would be putting in more input. Does that make sense? As far as we do things to kind of keep this balance, and if you don't keep the balance, or if that balance can't be made up for, then people end up leaving, and that's important. Okay, so that's equity theory. What about this other E, expectancy? This one's a little bit more complex. There's an equation that goes with this. E times I times V equals motivation. So the E was, what's the E stand for? Effort. Okay. There's a bunch of E's. It could be effort, it could be expectancies, things like that. What's the I stand for? You can look it up in your book, it's okay.
Incentive. Incentive.
Input. It stands for instrumentality. So, instrumentality, that's a lot of, so, and then the V, what's the V stand for? Valence, okay. Okay, so what this means is that these are like paths to get to motivation. And if there's a violation in the path, if it gets stopped here, then we don't have motivation. So the idea is that if, I have to, I as the person being motivated have to believe that if I put the effort in, I will get the performance that is being asked of me. And if I get the performance being asked of me, I will get the reward. And the reward will be meaningful to me. So let's think about this with a real example. So let's say we're a salesperson. Anybody got retail jobs or ones where you're selling stuff? A couple of people. What are you selling?
Baked goods.
Baked goods.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like in a bakery kind of situation?
Yeah,
or you make it
cupcakes, cookies, macaroons, and
all
stuff.
right, great. Do they keep track of your sales?
Kinda, like at the end of the day, they kind of keep track of what's left.
Okay.
If we didn't sell everything.
So you can see how you do it. And they would rather you would sell more than less.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that you have some control over this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say that you sold 5 cakes today. And then they say, that's great, tomorrow we want you to sell 6 cakes. So in order for that to be motivated, and if you sell 6 cakes, we're going to give you an extra $20. So that means that, so in thinking about this, that if you put in the extra effort that is required to try to sell that 6 cake, then you'll be able to do that. And if you do that, then they will actually give you the $20 that they promised to you. And $20 would be enough that it's worth it to you. So if any one of those things is not true, then then you're getting demotivated instead of motivated. Does that make sense? Okay. So what if, instead of saying sell 6 cakes and we'll give you $20, I say, well, okay, tomorrow you need to sell 10 cakes to get that $20. Suddenly, you have to double the amount of things you're gonna sell, right? So, do you think that if you put in the extra effort, you'll be able to sell 10 cakes? Yeah? Okay, maybe?
Maybe, just depends, you can't force someone to buy a cake.
Sadly, no.
Sadly, no. Yeah, I mean, like when I would get scolded at work when I was selling up desserts, and like I would tell them if they're having appetizers, 2 entrees, and everything else, I can't force them to buy a dessert.
Yes.
I'll just ask them if they want them. If they say no, then whatever.
What are you gonna do, right? Okay. So some people would say, well, in that case, you have to sell them harder, but some people would be like, well, so you'd have to believe that you actually can put in the performance that people want to see. And then you also have to believe that if you put in a performance, if you mentioned sell 10 cakes, they really are gonna come across as $20. Sometimes that's the part of the problem, right? They might say, great, it'll be on your next paycheck, and it's not. And then you have to have that $20 be worth the effort that you put in to sell those extra, to double your sales, right? So you think that there might be a problem in that path too? Or you think $20 might be worth it? And that's an individual call, right? That's an individual thing. There's not one answer for everybody on this thing. But the idea is that this isn't so much helping you to figure out how you would motivate this exact other person. It's more like you can take a look at the system and see where the problems are. Okay? So you salespeople in the room, have you guys ever been asked to sell, have they ever set your sales quota too high and you couldn't make it? Yeah. So, can you tell me the story about a time when that happened? Yes.
I used to be a makeup artist,
Mhm.
and so I would have to sell almost 300 a day.
Mm,
And usually my reach was about almost 200.
yeah,
Never ever gotten 300.
wow.
And so it was really, really hard for me, but you have to really, how do I say it?
So did you end up leaving the company?
Yes, I did, but not because of that,
Okay.
just for other reasons.
Okay. So they didn't ever do it, so did they promise you a reward if you sold 300?
Well, I think the reason why is because I was really good at my sales.
Mm.
When I first started, I only had to do 100.
Right.
But I always reached up to more than 100. I would do like 150, 200. So then they just thought, oh, she's a really good salesperson. Then you just tell her to do 300.
Great.
But I never got to that point.
We're gonna come back and talk about that with goal set. That's a good example. So does this make sense? Okay. So that's expectancy theory. So let's move on to reinforcement. This one is tricky. Anybody had a psychology class where you talked about reinforcement? See what it's like. So we know that reinforcement comes in both positive and negative flavors, right? What's positive reinforcement?
It kind of strengthens the behavior that we're doing.
Okay.
Just strengthening their behavior.
Strengthening behavior. Okay. Like what would be an example of positive reinforcement?
You train a dog to like sit, and when he sits, you go and treat.
Okay. Giving the dog a treat when he does something right. Okay. So positive reinforcement, and this is the place that's a little tricky, is anytime you give something. But the thing is that could be a reward or it could be a punishment. So if you give the dog a treat because they sat, that's positive reinforcement. But also if you give the dog like a swat because they did something bad, that's still positive reinforcement. So that's where it gets weird. So that's basically giving something, whether it's a reward or a punishment. And then conversely, so negative reinforcement then means taking something away. So people do this with kids, right? So you didn't do your homework, you don't get to watch TV. That'd be negative reinforcement, right? Can you think, or for like on the job, if you did something good, or like in classes, people use this sometimes. In some classes, if you have an A going before the final, you don't have to take the final, right? You guys do that in here? Certainly. Yeah, hopefully. You can put that, you can put a little bit. Right, so but that would be an example of negative reinforcement, meaning it takes away your having to take the final in order to reward your performance, right? So so negative reinforcement is just taking something away that can end up being a reward or a punishment. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah? So there's one industry in particular that really loves thinking about this in great, great detail. You know what that might be? That is the casino industry. Anybody big on going to Vegas? Yeah, a couple people. And the rest of you don't have to admit it, it's okay. Stays in Vegas. So they're really big on thinking about what is called a reward schedule. So you think about the slot machine, right? How often you're pulling that And you're expecting that sometime you're gonna get a reward, but you don't know quite when, right? So that's very motivating because you think it might be the next time. So that's called a variable reward schedule. So that's a lot of fun because there's a lot of drama involved in that. On the other hand, a
And this
fixed,
goes under reinforcement?
yeah, this is part of reinforcement theory. So on the other hand, a fixed reward schedule is when you know you're gonna get a reward at a certain point in time. So like if you're working a 9-to-5 job and you get paid every Friday, that is a fixed reward schedule. So kind of has a different feel, right, and you don't really know when this is gonna happen. So, but, you know, obviously if your pay was on a variable reward schedule, that might not work out too well for you. But you would certainly keep your interest up. So the casino industry loves thinking about this because they're working with this across a lot of people on a very large scale. So they spend a lot of time thinking about how rewards work that come immediately after, you know, the behavior that they want you to do, which is plug money into something, and how often you get rewards. Does that make sense? So, you know, just to mention that it is important, just like with dog training, it's really important to do it close to the time of the behavior. Otherwise, you know, if you reward somebody 3 months down the line for something you did today, they may not make the association. Okay, so we covered equity, expectancy, and reinforcement. Let's go back to goal setting. So you're giving me this great, so what's your name?
Yesenia.
It's Sonia?
Yesenia. Yesenia. Y-E-S-E-N-I-A.
Oh, Yesenia, okay. So Yesenia has a great example of goal setting. So what, has anybody had goals set for you by a manager or a parent, for example? Yes?
Already set from the year before, because I work at Little Caesars, so whatever we sold the year before,
Yeah.
that's what our goal, we try to top that for the next year, that same day.
Okay, so you're setting a goal that's gonna be higher the next year.
Yeah.
Okay. So goal setting is possibly the widest used style of motivation in all business. Because the idea is that you've got a target and you're gonna go for that target. And there's a couple of things about goal setting that everybody ends up using this acronym for. Have you seen this acronym? Yeah. Okay, great. So then you can tell me what these stand for. What's the S stand for?
Or
Not really. Good try.
specific.
Specific.
I
Different acronyms. Yes, it's too many acronyms.
know.
Yeah, what's the M stand for?
Measurable. I know the rest.
Okay.
Attainable.
Attainable.
Restrict.
What is it?
Restrict. Restrict. No.
Realistic.
Restrict. On time.
Okay. T.
Time.
All right, so this means that we're looking for when we're doing goal setting, we're looking for goals to be specific. So you want to know how, like, for example, how many units sold, not just like do your best. Try to sell more this year. It would be great if they came to you and said, this year just try to sell more, okay, right? But the problem is, and it might sound good, but it doesn't work very well. So measurable, so there's something you can measure. Attainable, or sometimes people call this aggressive, which means that you want to set them higher, to make it challenging in some way, and yet realistic. So that's why I'm saying going from 5 cakes today to 10 cakes tomorrow may not really be that realistic. It's definitely aggressive. And timely, which means that this is, you know, it's a reasonable goal given this point in time, and that you've got a time frame around it. So going back to Yesenia's example, you were a really good salesperson, so they gave you a goal that was more aggressive. You were getting close to 200, right? Or you were over 200?
I was trying to get to 300 every year.
Okay, so you achieved we only asked for 100, but you could do 200. So let's get you to 300, right? And that's the way a lot of this goal setting interventions work, is that basically whatever you're doing, let's have you do more of it, right? And then what happened?
Well, I started not getting to 300, and so they were kind of saying, like, oh, you can do it, you can already achieve 200, you can do 100 more, and I was like, oh, I'm trying, but I can't.
Yeah, so they were just figuring that somehow you'll be able to figure out how to do this. But that's not, but that was not the case. Did they give you an incentive, or did they say we would like it?
They kind of just said,
We want you to.
yeah, we want you to, kind of. They just thought that, because we have to go talk to customers, we literally have to go up to them and be like, hey, you know, you guys want to try that product?
This is like Sephora or something.
You used to look for benefit and San
Okay.
Macy's.
Yeah. Big Sephora fan. But yeah. Okay, so we may have a problem with that because maybe they didn't make it worth it enough for you. Or it might have been a problem of not having the basic resources. Because that's not on our list, but that's a really big deal as far as motivation. If you don't have the resources you need, you may not be able to get better performance or even a basic performance. So people forget about that one. But, where were we? Okay, so we gave you a measurable goal. It was pretty aggressive. It didn't turn out to be realistic, and we're going to assume that it was fairly timely. But what Senna's example points out is how this can kind of go wrong. So goal setting works beautifully for certain things, but it's got some limitations. What do you think's a limitation on goal setting? Where do things go wrong? Say even if you got all of this down, where do things go wrong?
Uncontrollable factors.
Uncontrollable factors, like the economy tanks and nobody wants to buy makeup. Okay. So not paying attention to the environment. Where else does goal setting go wrong? Okay, seasonally, like, you know, it's July and this is Christmas stuff, and again, you're not gonna sell as much as you would in November. Where else can you go wrong for goal setting? Think about times you've been asked to set goals.
Just turning your employees off, basically. Rather than motivating them, it just kind of
So demotivating.
demotivates them.
In what way would they get demotivated?
The last restaurant I worked at, although it's not exactly retail, but we still had goals we had to meet, like sales goals. For a while, it was encouraging because, you know, if you had higher sales, like, oh, good job, and we had little pins on our shirts, so the more pins you had is the more success that you did. So
Yeah.
it was fun in the beginning, give good service, but sell as much as you can. We have like this long receipt at the end where it has our per person average, desserts, appetizers, drinks, all that other stuff.
So you can see what everybody else is up to.
You can see what everybody else is up to, and it got to a point at the end of when I was there, which is usually one of the reasons why I left, is that it went from, oh, good job, it had like, well, we're gonna have our bottom 10 sellers, and if you don't do the sales right, then you're gonna get less shifts. And it would be like, Justine, where's your desserts at? Like, what's going on there? And I'm just like, I asked them at the end of their meal, it's just, I can't force them to buy desserts if they don't want desserts. And there's also, at the beginning of the meal, we're supposed to, like, kind of like pitch them our points, rewards, and membership and stuff like that. And I was like, I'll do it when the time was right, but I don't want to seem like a salesperson rather than they're just trying to go out and eat. So it just got to a point where rather than praising the people who did well, it's like, well, you're the bottom 5, and if you keep this up, we're not going to give you shifts anymore.
So it went from the carrot to the stick,
Yeah.
basically. Okay, so that's an important point we will come back to. But I heard a couple of other things in there that I think are important here. So one of them was that, you know, we're making the assumption that if we just do more of what we're doing, that we will get more sales. There may be some other limitations in terms of the deal. Maybe they don't want to have a rewards card, you know, but they may not know. But your story's reminding me of something that happened to me when I waited tables about, well, quite a while ago.
How long ago?
A long time. I'm pleased to see you. It was in Miami Beach in this very touristy restaurant in South Beach. And everybody who started there started in the section of the restaurant that was the least populated. And once you got your sales numbers up to a certain level, then you were allowed to go to a more lucrative section, and not until. It sounds familiar to people who waited tables. So the problem was that people didn't like sitting in that section because it was Siberia and there were all these other places to sit, right? So what I ended up having to do to make this work, to get out of the basement, because I was making no money, this was not worth it. And meanwhile, I knew that the people in the great sections were making incredible money. what I would end up doing is posting myself by the door, and as soon as somebody would come in, I would grab them and whisk them off to my section. And sometimes, you know, it got to the point where I'd see people, you know, trying to sit in a lucrative section, they were about to go sit down because somebody had moved, and I'd say, no, over here, I'm sorry, that section is closed, right? That's kind of an ethical breach, in a sense. Because I'm basically poaching customers from one of my fellow waitresses, who noticed and was not thrilled, but I made my numbers and moved out of that section, right? So the problem with goal, the main problem with goal setting is that because the great part is that it focuses you narrowly on a goal. You need to get your sales up, let's get them to this level. That can be very motivating, but it also means that by any means necessary. And so you end up with anyone, basically. Right? You end up with people being so focused on quarterly earnings and getting their metrics where they need to be so that they get their little reward, but then the whole company can go down as a result of that. And so that's the problem with goal setting. Just not to say don't do it, but you just have to be very careful about the way you set goals, the buy-in that you have from people into that, and being able to scan the environment regularly so you can see if what you're doing is actually helping the organization or if it's causing other problems. Or if, for example, you still have got the Christmas goal until next July. Questions about goal setting? Okay. Yes?
Sorry, I just wanted to know, because based off of, because I know you got into that from the sink.
How did we get there? Yes.
Yeah, how did we get there?
Let's go back to the sink. Let's go back to the sink. So what these are all your sink ideas. We're going to match these into the theories that go with them. So we haven't covered all the theories yet, so not all of them will go in this. I'm going to select a few. So also, along with that, I'm going to, no, let's not go there right away. This is an interesting list, okay? So I'm going to cross out use paper plates, because that's like a systemic change, so that this isn't even a question of motivation anymore, right? Which works. And board of sinks, so that nobody can do it. Okay. So, I mean, those would work, but they're not really going to match up to any of our motivational theories. So what, giving people a gold star, which of these theories would that go under?
Reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement, yeah. And so people often think that positive reinforcement is always a material reward. A lot of times it's praise. Praise works wonders, right? Or social recognition is kind of the bigger one. So letting everybody know that, what's your name? Jessica is our dish star this month, right? We had none of her dishes in the sink at all. Go, Jessica, right? So, you know, strangely enough, what that does is it gives people a tendency to like try to repeat that kind of performance. And so praise works wonders. Okay. Do we have any other reinforcement ones up here?
Removing the dishes. That negative.
Removing the dishes? Yeah, actually, that'll be negative reinforcement, right? Okay, you guys are so terrible at this, you don't get to use the dishes anymore. So now you might want to have a contingency that they'll come back if, under some circumstances, although I'm not sure how you would measure that, but basically, yeah, removing the dishes would be negative. Okay. See anything else? That could be one of those theories in lieu.
Would the penalty be another form of reinforcement?
Yeah, I think the penalty, now you gotta wash them by hand, would definitely be, well, it would be positive or negative, that's a tough one, right? Now you gotta wash them by hand,
That would be positive.
because you're adding a thing. Okay, so, charging a cleaning fee.
Equity.
Equity, yeah, okay, that's equity for, I'm gonna put in the same input as you, and that way you're gonna compensate me, I think that's perfect. Equity. You know, a lot of these are kind of arguable, because a lot of it does overlap a little bit, so this is not like the only thing that everything is necessarily. So I think we've covered that. Does this bring any more ways to get those dishes done to mind? Any to add? How could we use goal setting theory? to get those dishes into the dishwasher.
A different color plate,
What's that?
a different color plate.
Different colored plates, okay, so you get the red plates, you get the blue plates, you get the yellow plates. And we're gonna keep track of that, and so this time, you know, I only found 3 yellow plates in the sink, tomorrow, next week it's gonna be 2 yellow plates.
Easy.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. What about, what didn't we cover? Well, expectancy, let's take out one that might go horribly wrong, right? What if, well, we'll think about the whole thing. So what if the idea is that if I get my dishes, if I don't put my dishes in the sink, put them in the dishwasher instead, somebody will notice and give me a gold star. Right? Now, there's some ways that could go wrong, right? Because what if I just can't remember to, because it's late at night and I just drop it down there, then that's a problem. Or what if I put all my dishes away but nobody noticed? That's probably pretty accurate, I would say. And what if a gold star, really, who cares, what are we in kindergarten? Okay, so that's things that could go wrong. So that would be a way to think about that through an expectancy theory. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't think that we talked about needs theory. Let's talk about needs theory real quick. So you have seen a pyramid that looks somewhat like this, right? So all the needs theories are talk about is the idea that humans, everybody has basic needs. You have physiological needs, you have social needs, and you have needs for what they call self-actualization in Maslow's hierarchy. But it basically means that you need to have meaning, you need to have a reason for doing the things that you're doing. So there's the physiological needs here, the social needs here, and then the self-actualization needs up there. So this is Maslow's hierarchy. So this Alderfer guy, who calls it ERG, has basically the same kind of things, except that they're just not in a hierarchy. So that's existence, relatedness, and growth. But what Maslow did, and the thing that people found very compelling, was his idea was that you have to satisfy them in this order. So if you are hungry or in need of sleep, you're not even going to be thinking about social needs until you get that handled. And you're not even going to be thinking about doing the things that make life worth living, doing the things that you were put on earth to do until you've got the physiological and the social needs covered, right? Does that make sense? Does that ring true in your experience? Yeah. So this has become, a very, very popular way of thinking about these. We skipped Hertzberg. I'm gonna have to come back to Hertzberg. There's a little problem with this, and the problem is that it doesn't seem to be true. It's a great theory. There's no evidence. So when back in the 50s, when this came up, and people are still using this all over the place today, my advisor at Claremont, his name is Mike Csikszentmihalyi. He had his doubts about this because he had a lot of friends who were artists, and he was in grad school at the time. And he saw his artist friends stay up all night, not eating anything, to work on their big paintings, right? So they're foregoing sleep, they're not eating, they're not seeing anybody, they're being reclusive, they're growing large beards, right? So they're totally skipping these needs entirely just to focus on that. And he thought, what's up with that? Right? So he came up with a theory about what was going on with the medication. So what do you think was going on there? Have you ever been so immersed in something that you didn't really care about sleeping or eating? Yeah. What were some of the things you were really immersed in? What's that? I'm sorry.
I said there's flow going on there.
Flow, that is the name of the theory. Yes, it's flow theory. So that, and that's considered being in the zone, So we've had that experience. What are some of the things you've had that experience in?
Video games.
Football.
Video games.
Football.
Yeah, absolutely. Physical sports games, huge flow producer. Okay? And what's it like to be in the zone?
Time flies.
Time. Yeah, some people think it flies, some people think it stops. Yeah. What else?
You just don't feel anything, like you're not hungry, you're not tired, you're just,
Yeah,
it's like a high almost.
yeah, like complete immersion. And it is totally a high because they think of this as peak experience. Basically, as a human being, as good as it gets.
It's like similar to a runner's high.
It is, yeah.
You feel it at first, and then once you get to that point, you don't feel anything
Right.
after that. Using the zone.
There's an aspect, it's called action and awareness merging. Merge. So, which means that you feel as though you're just part of the environment, you're not as separate from the environment. So there's like this loss of self-consciousness. And so basically you get so into this that you'll just rather keep on doing this activity because it's a reward in itself. You're not doing it to get a reward. The activity itself is a reward. And so flow is really the first theory of intrinsic motivation, which is the idea that instead of the reward coming from outside yourself, the reward is within yourself, it's within the activity. So you're doing things that are so exciting that you would do, you're not looking for it to get paid, you're not looking to do it to impress people, it's just into yourself. So the way to be in flow, they discovered, required a balance of challenge and skill. So the challenge is about how hard the situation is, how many moving parts, for example. And the skill is how much skill you have at dealing with that. So what if you were in a situation where you had a high degree of challenge? This is a really tough situation, but you don't have a lot of skill, right? You don't really know what you're doing, you haven't had a lot of practice. What would this feel like?
Frustrating.
Choppy.
I'm sorry, frustrating?
Like choppy, like
Choppy.
not smooth.
That's smooth, okay. So this is a situation where like my husband loves whitewater rafting and I go with him sometimes. And he likes to go on some heavy duty rapids, right? And I'm a beginner, so we're going down this rapid and I don't really know what to do. There's a lot of challenge in that situation. So I am feeling anxiety. So what about over here? If I've got tons of skill, but the situation isn't really that hard.
Boring.
Or
You have no desire to keep going, really, because it's just.
yeah, exactly. And so what we're looking for, the place that we have flow, is right here in the middle. So basically it's a balance of challenge and skills, but maybe a little bit more challenge than skill. We're in slightly over our head. That seems to be the sweet spot for when it's really fun and engaging. And also, and so that's really important when thinking about flow at work, because that's also the place where people are learning something. You know, that's where you're expanding your skills a little bit. So, yeah.
What is it called on the bottom when you have?
That's a skill. So anxiety is on top, boredom's on the bottom. And then in the middle is flow. So maybe if you're just starting out, a really unchallenging situation is a match for your skills, and that's great. So, you know, we're playing the game at a very low level, you can still be very engaged. But by the time that you have to keep upping the challenge in order to stay engaged, and that's the point where it gets really interesting at work, because that's where you're learning, that's where you're developing, and that's how you're getting better at whatever task it is. So what do you think? Do you experience more flow at work or more flow in leisure? Leisure. Leisure? Who says leisure? Anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Who says work? Okay.
Well,
Go.
I would say if work is fun, you enjoy your job,
Mhm.
you enjoy working, and it's fun. I feel like that's not what you're doing.
Interestingly, in studying this for 30 years, people found that on average, people experience much more flow in work than at leisure. Why do you think that would be?
Well, leisure is supposed to be relaxing, coming down from, you know, when
I mean, that's exactly it, is that people choose activities that don't have a lot of challenge in it. So, you know, I've gotten pretty good at flipping those channels. That's a lot of challenge. So, so there's a lot of companies that are using this now. You know, especially tech companies love this. I heard earlier somebody said that they get into playing video games, right? Video games, the entire industry is based on this model because the idea is that they're trying to create experiences that will keep you right here in the zone, whether you're really good at it or whether you're on level 25, you know? So this is kind of the basis for how video games are often designed. And the companies that design them and the companies that are doing other tech stuff often work off of this model in terms of thinking about how the coding gets done, how the creative projects get done, right? So we moved away from the extrinsic model. So I'm going to contrast these two models here. So what kind of, we said that intrinsic is something that like a lot of tech companies use, with the idea that you're creating something that you have a lot of, that is intrinsically valuable to you, and doing the doing is fun for you. And so that's what keeps you motivated, right? So what do you think that companies that are, you're only doing it in order to get the reward? What would be some industries where that would be the dominant model?
Sales.
Sales, definitely one where they rely on extrinsic motivation.
Or would you do the reward or to
Yeah.
the reward of it?
Only to get the reward. The only reason you're doing it is to get the reward.
I think, banking industry sees it.
Oh yeah, banking industry. A lot of financial industries assume that the only reason you are here is to make some bucks. So we don't care if you're having a good time. We don't care if, you know, about any of that. We assume that you too want to make a profit, and so that's the method of motivation we use. And you know what? This is a lot of manufacturing. A lot of manufacturing exists because it's really boring, repetitive work. So this is basically, you know, we're talking about this being intrinsic motivation. There grew out another theory about this that looks a lot like a needs theory, and in fact is a needs theory, and it's called self-determination theory. So this also says that people have needs, and their basic needs are kind of similar, but they're not on the physiological level. So it's autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So this is the idea that, you know, with the extrinsic theories, we're thinking that basically if we don't motivate you, you're not going to be motivated. If we don't set up a system for rewards, you're just not going to do it, right? With the intrinsic theories, we think that you're doing it because you want to do it, because this is interesting to you, right? So we're relying on you. What we're trying to do is let you, the autonomy doesn't mean that you're by yourself. It means that you have the ability to choose how you're going to do things. Have you worked in a company that this sounds like? Has anybody worked in something like this? Yes, Lynn?
I just started with Jersey Mice, and we're doing our grand opening, and they had us try out every single position to cross-train so we knew what it was, and then we got to pick our top two, and that way we would get to do what we wanted to do, so we'd be better at it.
That's great. Yes, that's a perfect example. The idea being that if you get to do something that you chose and you are good at, then you will be motivated to do it, and we don't have to just like play with all these rewards and incentives and stuff, right? And that will create a much higher return for the company. Because one of the things right now that people talk about engagement a lot. Have you heard that term? Something that people are writing about in on the Business Review and other things. And the idea is that the more engaged your employees are, the better return everybody's going to get, the more profit people are going to make because they're going to find new ways of doing their job that will be better than the other ones, and they'll put up with a lot of adverse conditions. So the idea here is that this will all turn into engagement if you get to choose and you get to pick according to your strengths and then find things that you're good at, so you've got competence, and that are according to your own values. So the companies that use this are ones that really, they value engagement, but they also value creative work. Because you know what, this stuff does not work for creative work at all. A lot of studies have been done on how you get people to be more creative. Paying them more does not work. Does that square with your experience? Yeah, say it.
I think it was Priscilla was talking about police force in Mexico. They weren't getting paid enough, so they were taking bribes from people and they were enough tickets. And then they started to pay them better. Therefore, they have more risk of what they could lose if they took bribes, so they started taking.
Ah, great. Okay, that's great. Now that's a great case for extrinsic motivation. I'm not sure how creative that would be. So, yes, so I absolutely agree with you. And in fact, that makes me want to take a detour to hit the theory that we didn't do. Okay? So I'm going to take a slight detour back into the land of, the blue marker land of extrinsic motivation. And there's this thing called the two-factor theory. And the two factors are this, they're hygiene and motivators. So what your story reminded me of was that they weren't being paid enough, and so they did this ethical breach. So a hygiene factor is something that if it's not there, then people will not do what they're supposed to do, right? So under this kind of theory, if you didn't get a paycheck, or if your paycheck wasn't enough to live on, you're not going to be motivated to work. A lot of, you hear this in politics a lot, like we pay people on welfare too much, they're not going to be motivated to work. Right? So if, so on the other hand, with motivators, which will, if you add this onto it, then people will do more work. So we have to think about this in terms of like the basic resources that you need to do the job. So say you guys came in here and it was test day, it was time for your midterm exam, and the electricity was off, and it was totally dark in here. You would not be super motivated to get an A, right? You'd be trying, you might not take the exam.
I was looking.
If it's too cold in here,
Sorry,
you've got a
I was looking all
problem.
over my office. It's like, where is it?
Let me come back to that because I'm familiar with this. So, on the other hand, there's a motivating factor where if you add more of it there. So we say, we know that you won't be motivated to take the exam if the lights are off, right? But if you come in here the next day and it's like 200 watts of lights all over the place, does that make you super motivated to take this exam? Does not. Okay. So that's why, again, in trying to debug these incentive processes, this is just a way of thinking about it so that you, so you can see what's working as a motivator and what's not. So a lot of times people think that pay is a motivator, that if you pay people more, then it'll make them more motivated to do the thing you want them to do. That doesn't seem to be the case. Pay is often more like a hygiene factor where if you take it away, then bad things happen, like in that police example. But adding more, and then the police example, that wasn't true. They got up to a certain level and that was enough. You know, but if they doubled that again, it wouldn't necessarily have had a bigger effect. You know? So that's kind of the difference between hygiene and motivators. Does that make sense? So this is the, I don't think you can read that. I'm not sure you can read this either, but we're going to give it a shot. Hertzberg factor theory. So we were over here wondering what this word is. Can anybody read this? I'm not sure I can read this, frankly.
No, but you said.
That nobody loves doing dishes, right? Because if they loved them, they'd be doing them and we wouldn't be in this position. But do you see anything that might be intrinsic motivation?
The cleaning chart.
The cleaning chart. Okay. Anything else?
Well, the reminders could be Visible House.
Yeah, well, reminders, I think reminders is actually a pretty good example because the idea is we are assuming that you want to do the right thing. But now this is when we're getting over into pro-social motivation, which is our third theory. And this theory is super new. This is really only in the last 5 years this has been studied. But it's getting a lot, this is my first time talking about it in this class, which is really exciting. But that's because it's getting to be a real force that businesses are using to meet the current demands. And pro-social motivation means, let's contrast it. So intrinsic motivation, you're doing it to get the rewards. I'm sorry, extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation, you're doing it to help other people. You're doing it because other people want you to. You're doing it to maintain your relationship with them. Basically, you're doing it, the general one would be you're doing it to help other people. Yeah. That would be like well, the one that I'm really thinking about with that, you know, is up here. And that's great. This is great. Encourage them. Ask them, hey, will you do it? You guys, I have to tell you, you guys totally nailed it. This is the first time anybody's ever said, just ask them to do it as the first thing in the class. Usually we get to this point and I say, well, what's missing? And everybody goes, nothing, I don't know. Everybody's come up with all these terrible punitive ways of doing it right out. The reminders, there's a pro-social aspect to that. Modeling the behavior, you know, that's a little tough. You know, you're making the assumption that there could be the assumption that they won't do it unless you teach them how, or there could be the assumption that they would, and this is more social pressure to do it. So I think that could kind of go either way. That would depend on the context, you know. But this one we said was intrinsic, was the cleaning, doing drugs. That's also very pro-social because you don't want to help people out. You want to do what you think that they do. You know, you don't want to be a bad person and not do it. So that's part of the way that, you know, pro-social motivation is like that. Helping them. Talk a little bit about social pressure. So part of the reason that pro-social, okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story about how pro-social motivation. Was it what people new theory is something that a lot of companies are really taking advantage of in the economic downturn specifically because they don't have any more resources. They can't give anybody any more money, right? Can't make the work more fun. Stuff's got to get done, especially, you know, in a bad I mean, they've cut a lot of jobs, people are understaffed, it's not that much fun, there's not much you can do about that. But by highlighting the way in which what you're doing is actually helping and making the job so that you can see the actual worth of the work that you're doing, highlighting the way that, you know, we are a team and we're all pulling together on this, and don't let your teammates down, that's what's worth it. Make sense? That, I'm thinking that, you know, I never know when this class ends. When this class
You got 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes? How about questions and answers then?
Yeah, Q&A.
Okay, so think about maybe some motivation situations in your life where you'd like to get somebody to do something that they're not doing. Perfect question. And the way people are doing that, and it's true, you can't always create circumstances, or you can't push somebody in the flow, but you can sure get in the way, and so you can stop getting in the way.